Let me introduce Dr. Amy Gruss. And Amy is going to be presenting Occurrence of Microplastics in Drinking Water Plants, Southern Polytechnic College of Engineering and Engineering Technology. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. All right, I'm ready. So you might have heard that microplastics are everywhere in the salt, all the way in Antarctica. In fact, California recently has required monitoring of microplastics in their drinking water, which is what got me started on this topic of research. It wasn't a straightforward start, as most things are not. So upon completing my dissertation, I actually went to a consulting firm and worked with hydraulics. And I love to travel, so everywhere I went, I had to get a picture with a pump. So we have Montenegro, the Broad Street pump in London, and then Lithuanian pump as well. After doing hydraulics for a while, then I worked with wastewater treatment plants. So this is actually a picture of a sewage distribution system, but this is also from my honeymoon in Paris, because when you marry a fellow environmental engineer, you tend to honeymoon at the sewer museums, even when it's at Paris. But now my research is focusing on drinking water. So this is a picture of the plant that I grab all my samples from. This is in Cartersville, Georgia. And they grab their drinking water from Lake Allatoona. They treat it, bring it to the consumers. And then anything that is removed from that water sits in a settling pond. And then that eventually trickles to Lake Allatoona again. So we have our little schematic of how our drinking water is treated, and the literature shows that for the most part, you remove 75, maybe 97% of microplastics by the time it gets into the tap water. So what I wanted to look at was the sludge, since nobody was looking at this residual that was left over. So I grabbed sludge samples, and when I say I mean my awesome undergraduate researcher, Dylan. And right before I sent him out, the plant manager said, "Now be careful, because I saw a deer go in too deep and I never saw that deer again." But don't worry, Dylan graduated, got a job, he's doing fine. We also grabbed some drinking water or some clarified samples from the top, because that water flows to a creek that's seen here, and that creek leads to Lake Allatoona. So I wanted to look at if these microplastics were just cycling in the environment instead of being removed at any point. So what were we seeing? We had to do a big extraction procedure first. Now, there is no standard method, which in environmental engineering is like, nobody has heard of that, but there's no standard method to extract the microplastics. So it's the Wild West, but for the most part, we use the NOAA methodology for marine environments, so for the ocean. So I have a picture of Crystal here, who's filtering our sample after it's extracted, and then Kevin on the right is counting piece by piece under a microscope. So big thank you to Kevin for doing that. And then what did he find? So for the most part, our sediment samples that Dylan dug up didn't have a lot of microplastics in it. However, the water samples had about 40,000 microplastics per cubic meter. Is that a lot? It sounds like a lot. It's probably more than I want in there. But the literature ranges 10 orders of magnitude, because there are no standard methods. So what I wanted to do is test my method that I'm using. And to do that, I added microbeads, a known quantity of microbeads in my sample. I went through my extraction procedure. We looked and counted all of the microbeads at the very end under a microscope to figure out what our recovery rate was for our two different methods. The left sample here is in the water sample. We got 97% recovery, looking good, still look like microbeads. On the right side though, our sediment samples, we were only getting 6%. And I know I'm not great all the time, but 6% is really low for recovery. So I broke apart the steps to take a look at where my microplastics were missing. And as you can see, when we have a really heavy mixing step, they're actually shearing apart. And we're actually breaking apart our microplastics even smaller. And this is the standard method that most people are using when they're doing this research, and it's not even an accurate representation of our sediment. So right now I'm perfecting the sediment methodology, but in the meantime, we're taking water samples from the plant. So this is my student Ellie. She's a first-year scholar, and she collected all of our samples at the plant at the various stages to see how our microplastics were traveling through the plant. And then I have Yusuf here taking our sludge samples. The sludge and residuals at the plant are like 97% water, so we can use the water method. And he's using an auto sampler to grab that to see if we have a difference at the plant than at the settling pond. Maybe the environmental conditions are adding microplastics to our sample. So what are we finding? Well, we have a lot of filters to go through. We're still going through the sludge samples, but the drinking water, we're only seeing 20 to 40 microplastics per my 1 cubic meter of measurement. So not a lot. However, the ones that we are seeing are all microfibers. So we think of microplastics as pieces, but they're mostly fibers. So those fibers serve as vectors for other pollutants. So right now I'm looking at lead-laden microfibers to see what happens to that lead when it goes to our drinking water plant. Also, the next steps that we're doing is characterizing the microplastics that we find. This is our micro FTIR, and Kristen is here taking a look at the type of microplastic that we see, and also just helping to confirm that it's not just a cotton fiber that we're looking at in our sample. So where are these microplastics coming from? If they're not in our drinking water, for the most part, they're in the wastewater streams, and specifically laundry. So your laundry stream, if you wash like 2 pounds of fleece, you're gonna get 4.5 million microplastics in that wash, just from all those fibers. But at least we can cheers tonight, right? Maybe not with settled sludge, but we can cheers knowing we're not gonna consume a ton of microplastics. And if nothing else, we have an excuse to not do laundry when we go home. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was wonderful.